regulation in Australia. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The committee will be conducting today's hearing via video conference and in person. I am Senator David Van, as many of you know, Chair of the committee, and I have with me Senators Grogan, the Deputy Chair, and Senator Canavan. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such an action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also contempt to give false and misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the grounds on which it is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. The Senate has resolved that an officer of the Department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy, and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Commonwealth officers are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat over to my right, and I remind committee members and witnesses who are appearing via video conference and who are not speaking to mute their microphones. Sure. Committee members okay with having media in the room? Thank you. I would like to advise that representatives of the media have requested permission to film and take photographs of the committee's proceedings, and the committee has agreed to this. I remind the media that this permission can be revoked at any time, and the media must follow the direction of Secretariat staff. If a witness objects to being filmed or photographed, the committee will consider this request. The media are reminded that they are not able to take images of senators or witnesses' documents or of the audience. Media activity may not occur during suspensions or after the adjournment of proceedings. Copies of Senate Resolution number 3 concerning the broadcasting of committee proceedings are available from the Secretariat. With those official bits done, I now welcome representatives from the Energy Advisory Panel. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you each please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Claire Savage, Chair of the Energy Advisory Panel.
Anna Collier, Chair of the Australian Energy Market Commission and member of the Energy Advisory Panel.
Daniel Westerman, Chief Executive and Managing Director of the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, and a member of the Energy Advisory Panel.
I'm Anna Breakey. I am a Commissioner at the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and also an observer of the Energy Advisory Panel.
Thank you very much for attending, Ms Breakey.
And Stephanie Jolly. I'm an Executive General Manager at the Australian Energy Regulator, and I'm responsible for the Secretariat of the Energy Advisory Panel.
Thank you. Ms Savage, as Chair of EAP, do you have an opening statement you'd like to make?
I do. Thank you, Senator. So thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Select Committee on Energy Planning and Regulation today. As Chair of the Energy Advisory Panel, or the EAP, I'm here today with our two EAP members, Anna Collier, who's the Chair of the Australian Energy Market Commission, and Daniel Westerman, who's the CEO of the Australian Energy Market Operator. Also with me is Commissioner Anna Breakey from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, who has been attending the EAP meetings as an observer. I'd like to take a few minutes to give an overview of the Energy Advisory Panel, its role, its governance, and a flavour of some of the issues we have been discussing recently. The EAP includes the heads of the 3 electricity and gas or energy market bodies, the AER, the AMC and AEMO, and the ACCC as an observer. There are 3 other observers at Energy Advisory Panel meetings, including the Commonwealth Energy Senior Official and Energy Senior Officials from 2 of the states and territories, which is currently Victoria and the ACT. In May 2023, Energy Ministers agreed to establish the EAP to replace the Energy Security Board. This took effect from 1 July 2023. For a little bit of broader context, the ESB was established in 2017 to support implementation of the Finkel Review's recommendations and was extended in 2020 to focus on completion of the post-2025 market design project. In August 2022, Energy Ministers agreed to a revised terms of reference for the ESB and an extension to October 2024. At their May 2023 meeting, though, Energy Ministers agreed to a refocusing of the ESB as the EAP to coordinate market bodies' advice to governments under the National Energy Transformation Partnership. The EAP is a continuation and refocusing of the ESB, and it operates by the delegated authority of Energy Ministers and is accountable to Energy Ministers. The new arrangements took place from 1 July 2023. The EAP provides a forum of cooperation and consultation between market bodies and governments. The panel coordinates market bodies' advice to governments under the National Energy Transformation Partnership on issues relating to the security, reliability and affordability of Australia's East Coast energy system. Like the ESB, the EAP is a non-statutory body with no formal regulatory or policy decision-making powers. The EAP is underpinned by a charter and operating principles which set out that EAP will have 3 key roles: identifying, anticipating and providing advice on emerging and future energy market developments, focusing on providing early advice on policy and regulatory changes to sustain security, reliability and affordability through the energy transformation, providing a sounding board for Energy Ministers on policy and regulatory reforms under consideration or development, including through the National Energy Transformation Partnership, facilitating continued coordination, collaboration and information sharing between member agencies. The EAP does not have funding or staffing resources other than a half of an FTE for secretariat support. Unless directed otherwise, the EAP is not responsible for policy development. However, there may be certain occasions where it may be necessary for Energy Ministers to task the EAP with policy development, including on issues that are outside the scope of the National Energy Transformation Partnership or are technical in nature, or when this is required in a short time frame. This includes rule change recommendations. In terms of rule change recommendations, the Statutes Amendment National Energy Laws Rules Act 2018 establishes a mechanism by which a rule recommended by the ESB or the EAP to Energy Ministers can be made by the relevant South Australian ministers under the National Electricity Law, National Energy Retail Law or National Gas Law, provided Energy Ministers unanimously agree with the EAP's recommendations. The ESB's Rule Recommendations Process Guide sets out the circumstances in which and the purposes for which the ESB/EAP may make a rule recommendation to Energy Ministers. Under the Process Guide, Energy Ministers may ask the ESB/EAP to develop rule recommendations on its behalf. The EAP reports confidentially to the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council. As a result, and to ensure we do not prejudice Commonwealth-state relations, we cannot discuss the advice we provide to ECMC. At a high level, some of the issues we have been recently discussing include the need for market design work to support appropriate and timely investment in generation, and I note the government has recently announced a review to look at this issue. Gas market issues, including the outlook for declining use of gas distribution networks, the concept of an overarching duty as part of a customer protection framework as the energy system evolves, ideas for supporting effective access to and deployment and orchestration of consumer energy resources and distributed energy resources, and the need for continued work on essential system services to stabilise grid operations as the technology mix changes. These discussions have helped market bodies share views and insights on these issues with each other and with energy ministers in line with the EAP's purpose. The EAP's governance framework is set out in its charter and operating principles as agreed to by energy ministers. The EAP's chair rotates between the 3 EAP members. Ms Collier chaired the EAP's first 4 meetings between July 2023 and March 2024. I stepped into the chair role from June 2024 meeting and have held 3 EAP meetings in this capacity. In addition to having Commissioner Breakey in attendance, a senior official from the Commonwealth and on a rotational basis, senior officials from 2 other jurisdictions attend as observers. The EAP is a coordination and advisory body that is accountable to energy ministers. We will be reporting to the energy ministers at their meeting in Adelaide tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Savage. Sorry, did anyone else want to make any other statements? Okay, then I will throw straight to the Deputy Chair, Senator Grogan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Thanks for coming and joining us this morning. You've just stepped out what the EAP is. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what the difference between the EAP is and the ESB was?
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Grogan. So the ESB was constituted, as I said, in 2017 following the Finkel review. It had an independent chair and independent deputy chair, both of which were in a capacity of at least 3 days per week, so 3 to 5 days depending on that. So that was some committed resources to the ESB, along with the 3 heads of the market bodies. The ESB had a secretariat and it had staffing and resourcing that was provided from energy ministers to undertake policy development work. That included things like the integrated system plan, work that was done at the time, work on the National Energy Guarantee, the retailer reliability obligation, the work that was done on the post-2025 market design. So it had a very strong focus on policy development and it was funded and resourced to do that. And to contribute that advice to ministers. There are a number of rule changes that were recommended to ministers through that process. The EAP is quite different. It is a continuation of the ESB, but we don't have any resourcing or funding. We don't have any independent chair or deputy chair. We don't have any sort of ongoing FTE to support it, other than that half an FTE that the AR currently has to support the secretariat arrangement. So we have been meeting, quarterly, roughly, to essentially kind of coordinate our advice to ministers ahead of their energy ministers' meeting. So it's probably a lot less resource intensive, I would say, than what it was before. But that was in recognition of the fact that the National Energy Transformation Program commenced in, I think it was May 2023. And that effectively picked up that large policy development function, which is now dealt with via working groups and senior officials and various jurisdictions. So that's probably the best description I can give, unless Anna or Daniel. Yeah.
It's probably worth also noting, Senator, that there was an interim step where the ESB functioned with just the 3 heads of the market bodies. So I think it was at the end of 2022. There was a shift when we moved from having the independent chair and deputy chair to the 3 of us, but we continued with a fairly extensive policy program of work for a period of time before we were refocused as the Energy Advisory Panel.
So essentially a useful shift as the environment changed. So the job of work was completed and therefore you moved to more of a coordinating scenario. Would that be correct?
I think probably the best way to describe it is there was, in May 23, energy ministers made a deliberate decision to refocus the ESB and to take on the national, and they agreed the National Energy Transformation Program, and to see senior officials and their officials from the various jurisdictions drive the policy work through working groups, with the ESB members and now the EAP members being more a coordinating advice in that context rather than the drivers of the work.
So would you say that you're providing a useful coordination role in the energy system governance?
Well, I hope it's useful, Senator. I think from our perspective, we find the opportunity to come together and talk about the sort of key policy issues that ministers might be considering useful. We've all got our various perspectives. I think, what we obviously, I bring a regulatory focus, and Ms Collier brings a rules focus, and Mr Westerman brings a system operation focus, and so it does give us an opportunity to consider what ministers are currently have on their plates and to look at our advice in that context. So it's certainly useful to us, and we would hope useful to ministers as well.
Do you feel that with the three of you, obviously there are others there, but with the three of you, is this a piece of coordination and interface between the three organisations that, would you say this is the primary place where that occurs?
We have extensive work programs that are independent of one another that have points of overlap. We have our own independent relationships with each other to manage those points of overlap. I think the Energy Advisory Panel is really a forum for us to consider the broader issues that are in front of energy ministers.
Okay, fair enough. Now, Ms Savage, you've been at a range of these hearings, and you would be aware that there are those that view the energy market bodies as being, a bit of a conspiracy organisation, pushing renewables and nothing else. Which obviously then, if the three of you are working together within the EAP, that would mean the EAP was at the centre of this kind of conspiracy theory. And what would you say to those theories?
Well, I find them hard to understand, to be honest, Senator. I think we have very independent and different roles in the energy system. We have different views, to be honest, as well. I think as you think about the things that I said we've been discussing recently, they've probably not been in that space. We've been talking a lot about gas, as I mentioned in my opening statement. We've been talking about the future of the gas network, gas supply, gas-fired generation. We've been talking about distributed energy resources. We've been talking about customer protections and the overarching duty. In fact, I don't think any of our work programs have been specifically on either large-scale renewables or transmission, at least in the last few months since I've been chair.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
You're good. Thank you. Senator
Thanks,
Kennedy.
Chair. Look, I just wanted to start with last week's fiasco in Sydney. It seems to have woken a lot of people up. People are finally, I think, realising what the hell is going on, that I can't use my dishwasher in this country. What exactly happened last week and how close were we to major blackouts?
Can I just clarify, is that a question for us as the Energy Advisory Panel or for us? Because we're all appearing individually today.
I don't mind who answers it. I just think it's the most topical question on people's minds right now.
Okay. Well, the Energy Advisory Panel hasn't considered the issues from last week.
But you all have, haven't you?
So I think each of us are appearing today.
Okay. Yeah. But why can't you answer it up front?
Because
just answer it.
Well, it's just that we're appearing as the Energy Advisory Panel and the panel hasn't considered that issue, Senator.
But you have, haven't you? Or
so I'm happy to answer
has?
that question as the AER one. It's just that we're...
this is the frustration for people. I've got a lot of other questions to come back later in the day. Can't you just answer what happened in Sydney last week?
I'm just going to ask
It's the most topical question on people's mind.
The challenge I have is that we've been called to appear as the Energy Advisory Panel. We haven't met to discuss the issues that you're referring to. And I'm not quite sure I understand the issues, so it would be good to spell them out more.
You don't understand what happened last week in Sydney?
I understand there were high prices in Sydney last week. I understand that we had 4 coal plant outages. I understand we had network constraints.
Right.
I'm wanting to understand which element of it you...
My problem is if I ask you later, then I can't ask you all together. You're all here on a panel today, Chair. I'm not sure why you can't answer the question. It's perfectly relevant to this terms of reference, obviously.
And just so I can clarify, if it's a question relevant to the panel as a whole, then no problem with you putting it to the panel. But if it's going to specific roles of the various bodies, then it may be better off being asked.
Well, the problem is there's a lot of confusion here, Chair, about what people are responsible for, and I think there are more bodies in a graveyard here in this space, which is one of the issues. But they're all here, so I would like to ask them all together, because they all have different roles in the system, and obviously the prospect of major blackouts in our biggest city is a pretty big issue for our country. I don't understand why you can't answer the question.
So it's not that we can't.
If I could just I wonder if it's unfair to do that, given that they are appearing as EAP. They're not appearing as a panel in their own capacity. They're appearing as their role with the EAP. So I think Ms Savage is well within her rights to express some caution there.
I'd just say if I'm going to answer as the AER, I would want my AER witnesses to come to the table as well. So that's the difference, Senator, is that we're here as a panel. The panel hasn't met to discuss these issues.
And as a panel, if there is something that you can offer Senator Canavan, either now or on notice, I think that's more than reasonable. If you don't think so, he'll get the opportunity to ask them when the bodies appear themselves.
I think when each of us have got our witnesses for our individual agencies, we can then, because we've obviously got a monitoring and reporting role, so I can answer those questions. Mr Westerman, when he appears as AEMO, will have, an operational perspective. But he'll probably want his witnesses, so I think it's probably best that we answer those in our individual sessions. The panel itself has not met to discuss the issues from last week, so as the Energy Advisory Panel, I don't think we have anything to offer in response to that question.
Why hasn't the panel met to discuss the issues of last week?
Our terms of reference are very clear that we meet quarterly, Senator, and that we meet in the lead up to an Energy Ministers meeting. We did meet a few weeks ago, but we don't convene on day-to-day issues. It's to lead in advice.
Do you coordinate on an issue of like last week at all? Did you communicate on the day in the lead up to or afterwards?
Not as
informally?
The Energy Advisory Panel.
But informally?
But not as the Energy Advisory Panel, no.
Okay, but did you communicate informally among each other?
So I think that's a question then for us as individual agencies, as opposed to a question to the Energy Advisory Panel.
Okay, geez. All right, well, I might just ask the ACCC some... I mean, I don't know, the panel, I don't really know what you do apart from meet quarterly, so it's not much point. But the ACCC we don't have later, so I'd like to ask some questions of them, if that's possible. I'm particularly interested in the Iona gas storage situation. I know you report on this regularly. What is the situation there?
We do report quarterly on gas supply and demand. The Iona gas storage levels are relatively low at the moment. In our last quarterly report, we talked about the need for some of the surplus gas that is available to direct towards Iona. We would like to see good storage levels before next winter, but perhaps that is a question that AEMO is better placed to answer.
When's your next report due?
We are in the process of finalising it now. It will be with government this month.
Okay. So in that report, have the levels of the Iona gas storage improved since your last report?
They have gone up a little. They are currently, as I said, relatively... We would like to see more in the Iona storage. They are below the levels of about 4 or 5 years ago at this time of the year.
Right, okay. Is there a risk over summer of these being low, or is the peak demand in winter? Is there any risks for summer
I think
being
that's
this low?
a question best answered by Daniel, by Mr Westerman.
I'm happy to contribute, but I suppose I'm just wondering, given you write this report, you obviously say they're too low. Why do you say they're too low? What are the risks over the next 12 months or so, given that your assessment is that they're too low?
There's a geographic difference between where the supply and the demand is at different times during the year. In winter, the load is in the south, and so it does really require storage and good storage levels to ensure security of supply for both gas usage and for gas-fired electricity generation. So I do think it would be better for Mr Westerman to answer in an operational sense.
Do you want to come back later, Mr Westerman? Or?
I'd be happy to answer that question later, yeah.
All right. When did you say the report will be finalised, the last gas one, latest gas report?
In coming week, we'll send it to the government. So it's
up to government when they release it?
They've got 28 days from when we report.
I know years ago you did some great work on the cost curves of the production of gas in Australia. Has that been updated recently? I think you commissioned a body to do it from memory.
I think it was AEMO that commissioned that work.
No, it was definitely in your... This was going some years ago. Regular gas reporting that you do.
Yeah,
How often do you do it these days?
We haven't looked.
You haven't done that
recently.
Yeah,
no.
okay.
What we did is we observed in 2022. We observed what the offers were and struck prices pre the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we also had regard to some work that AEMO used on gas production, and that is how we derived the $12 a gigajoule reasonable estimate of gas production.
Right. Just on that then, I had some questions on that. I hear a lot of complaints from people that they pay more than $12 for gas. What proportion of Australian gas customers are paying under the $12 so-called cap? These are industrial, let's say industrial consumers. Obviously, residential is different maybe, but industrial consumers.
Our last... I'll just have to pull... Sorry, I do need to refer to the documents because I have been looking at the most recent numbers, but let me just pull that up. It's slightly older information now because this was our June 24 report. But the gas prices offered for 24 supply was averaging $14.30 a gigajoule from producers and $16.50 a gigajoule from retailers.
So it was over the cap? The price was over the cap?
It was over that reasonable price limit.
But there's meant to be a cap. Why is the average over the cap?
It's not meant to be a cap. The
government calls it a cap.
Yeah, it's a reasonable price,
right.
And there are the regulatory framework exempts small producers. Those are less than 100 petajoules, and there are conditional ministerial exemptions where the larger producers are offering gas dedicated to the domestic market.
Okay. I noticed this week the Daily Telegraph and related papers are doing some excellent work about, this is a more general question, about how important energy prices are to the broader economy. They're showing how bricks are more expensive, food is more expensive because energy prices are more expensive. Is there anything the Energy Advisory Panel is doing to look at the cost of higher energy prices to the whole Australian economy?
No, we're not, Senator.
Right. Is anyone doing this work, apart from journalists? Like anyone in the government looking at how energy prices impact our productivity, our inflation rate, cost of everyday items?
I think that's probably a question for the government, Senator.
No one is doing this. Well, good on the Daily Telegraph for highlighting it, but I'm not sure why it should be their responsibilities alone. It's a pretty important issue, but given particularly our woeful GDP figures yesterday. The other one I wanted to ask, it's a little bit dated now, but I do wonder if there's any more work going on. I noticed the ACCC in June had some figures out on how many Australian consumers energy consumers are suffering from hardship. Could you take us through your latest information on that?
I think if you ask the AER in their session, we tend to pick up their information.
Well, I've just got a media release here from the ACCC on the 28th of June this year. A milder winter and government rebates subdue the impact of increasing price on electricity bills. ACCC's latest electricity report shows that median effective prices across all regions grew by 14%, and you go on to talk about claims for financial hardship. So that's not, that's your media, it's on your website.
We collect billing information periodically. We'll come out with that again next year, but the AER does collect more regular information on that, and I think Ms Savage will be able to give you an updated information.
Right, okay. Look, I don't think I've got any more questions for these guys. I think we just need to go to the detail. Thanks, Chair.
Happily. Just a couple of general ones from me. Not trying to compare and contrast, but the ESB used to publish an awful lot of its work, so it was available to the public. Does the EAP publish its work, or is it too treated as confidential?
Now that we've moved to advice to energy ministers, we don't publish work. It's just provided confidentially to energy ministers ahead of their energy ministers meeting.
Any background documents that you've used to form views, would they not give stakeholders some view of what you're looking at and therefore bring about some transparency?
So we have, when we come to meetings, we obviously have materials that we've prepared, but those materials then go on to energy ministers, so they're covered by that confidential advice, Senator.
Right. What about EAP's terms of reference? I think we've all, certainly at this table, all gone looking for them and haven't been able to find them. Are they available somewhere?
We do have a terms of reference and an operating charter. I'm not sure why they haven't been published. I think that's a question for the government.
So that would normally be on the DQ website somewhere under the ECMC?
We went looking for them too to see if they were published. We don't think they are published, but I think that's a question for the government.
Interesting. It's not the only document that hasn't been there recently. I will put those questions on notice to DQ or ask them in Senate estimates. Just a couple.
It may just be an oversight too. I mean, I pretty much ran through them in my opening statement, Liz.
On the continuum of conspiracy theory and stuff up, I've always gone stuff up. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I literally pretty much read them out through the opening statement, so I'm sure it's oversight.
Excuse me. If you can find it and I'm not able to get it from the department, would you be able to table it, or is it sufficiently covered in your opening statement?
I think it's covered in our opening statement.
And you've tabled that?
But I think the decision to publish those documents would be a question for government, so you need to ask DQ on notice, yeah.
Sure, but can I assume you'll table your opening statement?
Opening statement, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That will help. Ms Breakey, thank you for showing up today. Very much appreciated. So we haven't got too much time, but I don't think there's a lot of questions for you. Matt, you already asked yours, didn't you? Deputy Chair, did you have... No? Good. We might be able to get the panel wrapped up pretty quickly then. Acknowledging that the ACCC is simply an observer on EAP and has no role in providing the evidence that goes to the ECMC, do you get the opportunity to share things that you observe and any concerns that you might have with the panel or higher up the chain, so to speak?
Certainly. I do attend the EAP meetings, and I am given an opportunity to speak at those meetings where I raise any concerns or issues that I feel are relevant. But in addition to that, we have working relationships with the other agencies, both at a staff level and at a commissioner level.
Terrific. So how long has ACCC been on the EAP?
Since its inception, which was 1 July 2023.
23. Okay. I thought it was earlier. Then just some general questions on the way the ACCC would look at, and if it had the powers to do so, exploring further or investigating into misuse of market power. Is that something you could comment on, in this?
In general, when we see an issue that is of concern, we will put it through our processes. If it raises to a certain level of concern, we will start an investigation. We don't comment publicly on investigations on the way through until we come up with a proposed course of action. That might be issuing of penalty notices or institute of proceedings, and that's the point where we, it's on the payment of the penalty notices, but that's when we make those public. There are occasionally exceptions to that, but it's the exception, not the rule.
Thank you very kindly. You would be, I should put it as a question. Within this inquiry, there's been an awful lot of evidence that's been led and testified to in hearings about abuse of market power, unreasonable cost increases, and the like that have appeared on projects, particularly large transmission projects. Where some of them have seen, a doubling, then a doubling again of costs of those projects. Given that the proponent of those is shielded as a monopoly, would that limit the ACCC's power to be able to look at that situation, or would you be able to look at it and give a
Look, our powers are economy-wide and general in nature. I would say in that instance, though, to the extent that there's an intersection between economic regulation and our general laws, we would be working very closely with the AER and would, in fact, to the extent that it is a regulated aspect, rely on that regulation as a general rule. There could be aspects of any conduct in the economy that could raise issues, and where we are alerted to them, we will investigate them.
Understand completely, and would not think for a second that you wouldn't work closely with AER on those. My questions at least go to, and it's quite an unusual thing within the Australian economy, the way that the electricity system's set up, and particularly how the poles and wires of distribution and transmission is paid for. Normally large infrastructure projects would, if they're in the public good, would be funded by governments, goes on their balance sheet, checks and balances through all sorts of processes, including Senate estimates. And then it's paid for by taxpayers. With the system we've got, particularly with energy transmission, it goes through a process of assessment of some sort, but then those costs are shooted straight back to energy consumers without any say over it, without, they can't defend themselves from those market decisions or that market power. Just interested to see, and please feel free to take it on notice if that raises any questions in ACCC's mind.
I think we'd be looking at specific conduct. We are aware, obviously, that the transition is significant. What we are concerned is that as we move through and beyond the transition, that we do have the elements of competition where they are available, working well to protect customers. So it is an area of focus for us, and we are watching we're watching that area because we do want to make sure that it's done in a way where there isn't an abuse of market power.
Understand completely. I think it's in competition would obviously be a welcome thing in the NEM. It was designed, it was set up to start going down that path, but it's not a very easy thing to do. But where I think a lot of Australians listening in today will have a lot of heartache is just knowing that all these costs get passed on to them with little or no say over it, or accountability in any sort of democratic form.
Yep. What I will say is, we will look at our legislation and look for contraventions of that. We will work very closely with the AER for their role as the economic regulator and the intersection between those, and that's something that is active and will continue through the transition.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's all the sorry, Senator Kent.
Time.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If we've got time. Does anyone here read the energy analyst Doomberg? No. I would very much suggest you do. He's an American analyst. He is as a nom de plume of a green chicken, but he's very knowledgeable. He's written about Australia in his latest Substack article, which is very widely followed around the world, energy world. He normally doesn't write about Australia, but he's taken it on himself this week to write about Australia in the light of last week's Sydney fiasco. And he says here, it's a long article, I'll just quote a little bit, the entirety of the country's struggles with its grid can be traced back to the forced introduction of low-entropy parasitic renewables. Simply put, if something is making you sick, the first step is to stop eating it. Australia long ago reached diminished incremental utility of new solar and wind facilities. On sunny or windy days when the grid gets overwhelmed with power it doesn't need, having more capacity is counterproductive. Why is he wrong? I think there's a very cogent argument in this article I'd suggest you look at, but why is he wrong?
So we haven't had an opportunity to see that article, obviously, Senator, so it'd be worthwhile if you wanted to table it, we could respond. But
just the central premise here, I'm happy to, although I better not. It's a paid subscription, so if I table it, I've just undermined his intellectual property. But it's just a direct quote. The premise here that on sunny or windy days, when the grid is overwhelmed with power it does not need, having more capacity is counterproductive. Why is he wrong? Why is that wrong?
One of the things I said in my opening statement, Senator, was the Energy Advisory Panel has been discussing recently system security issues and looking at the stabilisation of the grid. So that is something we're actively discussing and considering as part of EAP meetings, but obviously that advice we give to ministers is confidential. Okay.
Again, you might not want to answer this now, but I thought I'd better ask this one just in case. Has the EAP got any role in advising on the various capacity mechanisms being rolled out? Obviously the Commonwealth scheme. Are you advising on that?
So the Energy Security Board previously did work, as you'd remember, on the post-2025 market design. The Energy Advisory Panel has the Capacity Investment Scheme is a scheme under the National Energy Transformation Program, so the Energy Advisory Panel does have a role in providing advice in that context, we're not developing it, but from an advisory perspective, but that advice would be confidential.
So is your advice being sought on the design of the Capacity Investment Scheme?
We have, under the National Energy Transformation Program, given advice on a range of government initiatives, including the Capacity Investment Scheme.
Did you advise that it should be technologically neutral?
I can't tell you the nature of that advice.
The ESB's advice was published on this matter, but your advice is not.
So the ESB had a different function. So the ESB's role there was to develop the policy in the context of the National Energy Transformation Program and the new Energy Advisory Panel. Our role is simply to provide advice to ministers on things they are developing.
But it's completely non-transparent to the Australian people.
It's covered by the parliamentary. Well, it's covered by Commonwealth-state relations and the provision around that for public interest immunity.
Okay, all right. That seems very strange. All right, but again, this advice, the same sort of advice, was publicly available by the ESB under the former government, but this government obviously has taken a different position on transparency. I note, though, that despite the Commonwealth mechanism, there seems to be a fraying of the the approach here among the states. I believe South Australia has recently applied to restart 2 diesel generators to provide more capacity. Has anybody got any insights on that?
So I think Ms Collier might have an answer to that under the AMC's evidence later this morning.
But is that something that the EAP has provided advice to South Australia on?
No, the EAP has not been asked for advice on that, Senator.
Okay. I believe that the operators of those diesel generators had cited earlier this year the lack of diesel being in, or lack of technological neutral aspects of the CIS, the Capacity Investment Scheme, as being a reason why they had to shut. And now they're looking at being reopened, apparently. Did you provide any advice back then to the government about the complaints of ENGIE about the design of the Capacity Investment Scheme?
I don't think I can tell you the nature of the advice we provided at the time.
Did you?
We have provided advice under the National Energy Transformation Program on a range of government initiatives, including the Capacity Investment Scheme.
But did you provide advice in particular about ENGIE's issues around the diesel generators in South Australia?
I can't tell you the nature of the advice we gave, Senator.
You surely can tell me whether you provided advice on that matter. That's not a question that would typically be refused.
On the Capacity Investment Scheme?
No, but I'm specifically asking, did you provide advice about ENGIE's generators in South Australia, the 2 diesel generators?
I think that question goes to the nature of the advice.
It does not. It clearly does. Chair, can I put... I mean, this is a very strange situation we have, where we've got state bodies here, state Commonwealth bodies, and we've got a serious issue here. In a Senate estimate situation, if I asked, did you provide advice on an issue, I'd get a yes or no answer. I'm not asking you what the advice was. Did you provide advice on the ENGIE's closure of these 2 diesel generators earlier this year?
As the EAP?
Yes.
As the EAP, I don't believe we did, but I'd have to take that on notice and go and ask.
I'm not asking for the nature of the advice, even though I think it's very, very strange we can't have access to that. Okay, I'll come back to that later. And look, finally, Chair, since we last met, Donald Trump's been re-elected as president, obviously upturning world energy policy, climate policy. Has the government asked you for any advice on international developments on climate and energy policy settings and their relevance for Australia?
No government has asked the Energy Advisory Panel for advice on that, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I can release the Energy Advisory Panel, and thank you for coming along. I'm not sure if any questions were taken on notice, but if they were, if you could respond by Thursday, 12 December, please. And with it, please, the other members, and I now call the Australian Energy Regulator. Team get settled. I'll do the obligatories while we're settling in. I now welcome representatives from the Australian Energy Regulator. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when or how policies were adopted. Commonwealth officers are also reminded of Senate Standing Order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard, can I ask you each to state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Claire Savage, Chair of the Australian Energy Regulator.
Justin Oliver, Deputy Chair of the Australian Energy Regulator.
Anthea Harris, CEO of the Australian Energy Regulator.
Stephanie Jolly, Executive General Manager, Consumers Policy and Markets at the Australian Energy Regulator.
Matt Garbutt, Executive General Manager of Compliance Enforcement and Surveillance at the AER.
Thank you.
Jeff Purvis-Smith, General Counsel.
Thank you all kindly.
See why I couldn't fit them all before.
Sorry?
You can see why I couldn't fit them all at the table before.
Absolutely not. I absolutely understand. Do you have another opening statement to make?
No, Senator.
No?
We've already made an opening statement to this committee, so happy to take questions.
Perfect. I'll go to the Deputy Chair first then.
Thank you, Chair. Now, through the duration of this inquiry, there have been various statements and accusations made against the AER. I'm just wondering if you'd like an opportunity to address any of those.
I don't know if we've tracked everything that everybody said about the AER through the course of the inquiry, but we certainly have. The committee secretariat's made us aware of at least 2 submissions, one from the Centre for Independent Studies and another one from the HumaLink Alliance, which we've responded to those those assertions in their submissions, and we've done that in writing, Senator. So I think we're happy that we've had the opportunity to put our case on record.
Okay, there's nothing else you wanted to deal with there? Okay. One of the things that that came up through the Centre of Independent Studies was a comment from Mr Morrison, who said that he basically felt that the AER doesn't effectively consider consumer interest in making any of your regulatory transmission decisions. Is that true?
Sorry, it's just a little bit hard to hear you, Senator. Did you say, is that accurate? Oh, well, no. I mean, we are required to make our decisions consistent with the National Electricity Objective, the National Gas Objective, the National Energy Retail Law Objective, all of which are couched in terms of the long-term interests of consumers. So that's a statutory responsibility on us, and that is obviously the guiding principle that we take into consideration in our decision-making. So it's factually inaccurate.
Thank you. That's all from me, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Kendaband.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just wanted to go to the question I asked earlier about the situation in Sydney last week. Did the AER have any involvement with the crisis in Sydney last week?
So just to clarify, Senator, you're referring to the high prices in New South Wales last week?
Yeah, the triggering of the RERT, the potential for an LOR 3, all of that last week.
Yeah, so our role as it relates to that is we have a responsibility to report on high price events. So whenever the electricity market is above $5,000 per megawatt hour, we would produce a report that looks at the cause of the high prices. That report isn't out yet, but I'm happy to take you through some of the issues that occurred. So on the 26th of November in New South Wales, at this stage, and we don't have all the information available yet, but the drivers of high prices, we've had very high demand of around 11,200 megawatts, which was driven by high temperatures. There are a number of baseload coal outages with 4 units off, totalling 2,690 megawatts. So Eraring Unit 3 was out on a planned outage. Bayswater Unit 2 was out on a planned outage. Bayswater Unit 3 was out on a planned outage. Vales Point Unit 6 was out on a planned outage. There was also very low wind generation at that time.
I might have missed, sorry about that. It was Eraring 3, was it unplanned or planned?
All 4 last week were planned. Eraring went out yesterday unplanned, but last week it was...
Oh, they were all planned last week. I thought one of them was unplanned, but no.
No, I think all 4 were planned last week. So
right.
Eraring Unit 3, Bayswater Unit 2, Bayswater Unit 3, Vales Point Unit 6. There was low wind generation, so there was about 280 megawatts of wind out of a total 2,762 potential capacity in New South Wales. 3 of Uranquinty's power station units tripped, that's gas-fired power stations, Senator, around 4:40 p.m. The interconnector flows were limited into New South Wales, but there weren't any outages on the interconnector. And at this stage, we're just looking at some of the, well, obviously Origin had rebid its capacity at Uranquinty for technical reasons, which was the tripping that we noted above. So that's the 26th of November. The 27th of November in New South Wales, the drivers of the high prices were very high demand again, driven by the heatwave conditions. We again had the 4 baseload outages that I referred to before, so Eraring Unit 3, Bayswater Unit 2, Bayswater Unit 3, Vales Point Unit 6. The interconnector flows were limited into New South Wales, but there were no outages, and we had Origin remove 190 megawatts of capacity at Uranquinty and Shoalhaven for technical reasons. I think it was on that day that you might be referring to the fact that AEMO declared an actual lack of reserve, level 1 and 2, and implemented the reserve contract for system security and reliability purposes. But I note that Mr Westerman will be appearing later this morning and he can talk to that. There were 11 30-minute high prices that were forecast in the 12 hours and 24 hours before, but actually only 2 eventuated on the 27th of November. On the 2nd of December in New South Wales and in Queensland, the drivers of high prices were again very high demand driven by warm temperatures. Wind generation was low on that day, 300 megawatts out of 2,762 in New South Wales and 220 megawatts out of 2,117 megawatts in Queensland. There were coal outages in both New South Wales and Queensland, quite significant. And interconnector flows were limited into New South Wales, but no outages. We don't have rebidding data available yet for the 2nd of December. On the 3rd of December, the drivers were high demand due to significant reduction in rooftop solar generation. There was a storm that came through Sydney at that time. Calm conditions also meant low wind generation. We had 439 megawatts out of 2,762 of wind at that time. The 4 coal plant outages, obviously, and the ones in Queensland, interconnector flows limited. So that's the sort of thing we do, Senator, in the context of these high prices. We analyse them, we put out a report. You might have seen we had a quarterly report out for Q2 and Q3 looking at all the causes of high pricing through that period, and we'll do the same for these events.
Okay, great. Just on these coal outages, I just found what I thought I'd seen. What Clarity, you probably know the website What Clarity?
I know What Clarity.
Yeah. They had their model, I can't remember the name of it, but their proprietary model, they published a chart from it. It had Bayswater 3 described as an unplanned forced outage, but that's definitely planned.
Well, I'll check with Mr Garbutt, but we've got it here as a planned outage.
Okay, okay, all right. Okay.
On which date, Senator?
Well, they've got multiple dates here, and it would appear to have been out until the 1st of December, from the 13th of November. The graph I'm looking at. Hang on, just sorry.
So Bayswater Unit 2 is still off. It's expected to come back. Oh, no, did it come back yesterday? I think it was expected to come back yesterday. Bayswater Unit 3 was returned on the 30th of November. We've got both of those as planned outages, but we can take that on notice.
Sorry, just to be clear, it was from the 21st of November, Bayswater 3, had 0 output through to the 30th of November.
Yeah, but
that's what you've got, but you've got as planned. They've got that definitely here as unplanned forced outage in there.
The way we would determine something to be unplanned would be, there's a thing called the medium-term projected adequacy system assessment, so the MT PASA, and there's a short-term PASA. So if something's appearing in the MT PASA and then isn't in the short-term PASA, then it tends, because of the time frames, that would tend to be an unplanned outage. But we have that as planned.
Okay.
Yeah. That's correct, Matt.
Just while we're on it then, it does others have remarked on this, it does seem a little strange to me. Why were 4 coal units out for planned outages a week before the start of summer?
So this is the shoulder period. Historically, this is the time at which outages have been taken, particularly, so you sort of see it in spring and again in autumn. I think what we're also looking at is this question of when is it better to schedule planned maintenance, in the sense of the way we're becoming a more weather-dependent system. We'll need to look at how those outages are scheduled throughout the year.
I mean, it was hot, but it was a week before I had a look at the Bureau's forecasts, and for Sydney, or averages for Sydney, you'd expect a day like that 2 or 3 times a year.
My understanding it was the hottest
Sydney.
November on record. But
that particular day in Sydney,
which day are you referring
the
to?
27th
The
November, the
27th.
one that was more extreme or more critical for the electricity system, looking at the Bureau's statistics that I looked at, you'd expect a temperature of over 30 degrees 2 or 3 times each November. That's for the whole of November, not just the week before December. They only had monthly averages that I could see. So it didn't seem unusual.
I think
relative
sometimes
unusual.
what we see with electricity systems too, though, is that when you have consecutive days of hot weather is when the demand is much higher, because you tend to get, obviously, people in their homes don't necessarily feel the need to cool them to the same extent on the first day of a heat wave, but second, third, fourth days, that's when you tend to see that the load will pick up.
Okay. So the other thing I wanted to ask about was the RERT. Have you got any information on that yet, about how much
I'm not
was...
sure if we do yet. No.
You haven't got that?
Yeah.
That's our EMO. They contract the RERT?
Yeah, so EMOS has the responsibility for contracting the Reliability and Emergency Reserve Trader, usually done sort of at least 12 months in advance, availability contracts, and then payments if it's discharged.
I'm particularly interested in what was actually
what was
used
dispatched. Yeah,
last week, but you don't know. Presumably you will be provided that for your review,
Yeah.
for your review of the high-priced days. Okay. Maybe then, do you have, for the other events you've evaluated over the past 2 years, say, have you got information on the use of the RERT?
We do. Can you just give me a moment
Okay,
to
sure.
find that in the... From memory, I don't think the RERT was activated in the last 12 months before that, but I'm just trying to find that, if that's okay, Senator. I literally remember reading this last night and I can't find it now. Is it okay if we take that one on notice, Senator?
Sure. Okay, that's fine. And just to be clear, so on notice, if we can get the amounts and dates that the RERT was activated, not contracted or made available, but actually used, and so the amounts and also what resources were applied. So was it an aluminium smelter? Was it because presumably new generation come on as part of the RERT as well?
No, in-market resources can't be contracted.
It's only
as part
demand.
of-
It's only demand. Okay,
It's
so
got
what
to
is
be all out-of-market resources.
Okay,
so,
right,
yeah.
right. Yes, okay, all right. Anything like that, then, exactly what was used. Just going back to this question of the coal units outages, so you're saying that all 4 of those last week were planned.
I'm just going to, Matt, have you double-checked this just against the daily
'Cause-
market reports from last week, please?
Yeah, because the Energy Minister in the House last week said that yesterday I outlined to the House situation in New South Wales, which was that 5 power plant units were down, 4 coal and 1 gas, as you've said. And then he said 3 to be expected and 2 breakdowns.
So if we get a daily monitoring report,
yeah.
I'm just asking Matt now to check our daily
but
monitoring
just to make sure,
report from
because we
last
seem
week.
to have...
Because I'll make sure it's not a typo in our brief, Senator.
Yeah. Was the gas one? I might have just missed that one.
The gas one was unplanned.
That was definitely unplanned.
Yeah.
So that's
So
one
the-
of them.
the tripping
We're
of
just
around
trying to work
20
out.
was- yeah.
The minister said 2 breakdowns, and you're saying all of them were planned. Okay. All right. Okay. Might move on to this hardship issue then, if I can. I raised earlier. So you're apparently the one that does the work on the hardship and then sends it to the ACCC. So could you take us through what the latest figures are on how many Australians are suffering hardship from energy prices?
Yes, definitely. So what we released recently was our annual retail market performance report. So that looks at all of that data that you're referring to, Senator, in terms of hardship, payment plans, debt levels. So we produced that annual report. It was for data that took us to the end of June 2024, so this year, so the calendar year. In that report, what we could see was that the average of the residential number of customers with 90-day debt, so that's residential customers, is stable year on year at 2.9%, but that the average volume of energy debt increased from $986 to $1,148. What's not included in those numbers, Senators, are the number of customers who are on hardship programs. The number of customers in hardship programs increased year on year from 1.4% to 1.9%.
Right. That was for last financial year,
Yeah,
was it?
last financial year.
Okay. So
We collect the data quarterly and we put out a quarterly report, but we haven't yet finalised the report for the most recent quarter, the Q3.
Okay, when will that be out?
That should be out over early January, isn't it? Yeah.
Be in the new year.
January. Are you expecting a moderation of that amount in hardship because the rebates will have come into effect this financial year? Or?
Hard to know. I would say we will obviously start to see rebates flowing through to customers from 1 July. Certainly last year we saw that the numbers went down when that happened, but I don't think we'll know until we've seen that data, Senator.
Just maybe you said this and I might not have heard, but 1.9%, how many households is that?
Let me get the raw data. So the number of customers, so not households necessarily, but customers, 131,746 at 30 June 2024.
176,000.
No, 131,746.
746, thank you.
The other point I'd make about hardship programs, Senator, is we strongly encourage retailers to give support to customers as early as possible, and in fact we've had some successful court outcomes against retailers in this regard. So we have seen an increase in the number of customers who enter hardship programs with low levels of debt, particularly even less than $500. So that average debt on entry to a hardship program has fallen. So we would expect to see customers getting help earlier, given our significant compliance and enforcement focus on that.
Okay. I'm just turning now to a separate question. The AEMC recently released a report about residential electricity price trends 2024. Are you aware of that report?
We are aware of that.
Okay. Were you consulted on that?
We certainly got a briefing on it before it was released.
Okay.
I just need to check. I didn't as the chair, but I'll just ask the teams.
Yeah, at staff level, we had a couple of discussions with AEMC staff as they thought about how they would do that work over the course of the year, and they briefed us on it as they completed it.
Well, the reason I'm asking you guys is on page 12 of this report, there's a chart of their average residential electricity price outlook. Maybe it might be helpful if I table. I'll just have to send to the Secretariat, sorry. But you previously, when we last met, Ms Savage, you've spoken previously, and I asked you about this wall of CapEx coming. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but that when you refer to the wall of CapEx, you are referring to investments, I think primarily in distribution network. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. But in this report, which you'll see if I can get it to, I'm sorry for this, but I might just need to ask the Secretary what's your email is. Email?
Oh, email?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
EPRA, yeah.
Steph's pulling it up.
Yep, okay.
Ms Jolly's got it here if you want to direct
got
us
it.
to the page.
Okay, I think I've got it. So I'll try and get this tabled.
Ours are slides. Is that what the report is?
So you've got the report. Yeah, I thought you might know it pretty well. Anyway, I've sent that to you, hopefully, if it can get tabled as well. What I'm asking is if you'll notice if you are looking at that chart on page 12, it's like a PowerPoint slide.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's the only report I could find.
One?
That's it? Yep. That's it. So the blue section is the network, obviously, but it doesn't seem to change much. So I'm just wondering where this wall of CapEx is. And why doesn't there seem to be increased costs associated with, particularly given this whole report, I think one of the premises of the report is that consumers will use more EVs and batteries and behind-the-meter type electricity products, which I thought from your evidence would generate the need for a more resilient, presumably higher cost distribution system.
So I think what we're seeing here is I'm just reading the note that's to the right of that where it says network prices. So when you've heard me talk about CapEx and my concerns about a wall of CapEx, I'm referring to costs in the distribution system. I haven't spoken to what I think will happen on prices because it's a function of what happens to demand. And so what's happening here is it says network prices are projected to fall by about 11% over the outlook, with an increase in residential demand countering the higher levels of network investment recovered from residential customers over the 10-year horizon. So it looks to me like they have accounted for higher network costs, but they've been more than offset by increases in demand.
So just the average costs are staying stable, is that what you're saying?
Well, I obviously can't speak to the AMC's work. I'm just reading off the same slide as you. But what it says is it's obviously got higher costs in there, but they're using a larger denominator, which is the demand.
It seems though, I mean, at the moment we're facing, like in the next few years, we're facing potential charges for people to export their solar power because of constraints in the grid. Do you agree that this wall of CapEx won't lead to higher network prices for consumers?
So as we start to think about where this turns up for us is in the distribution businesses who come to us with their 5-year revenue proposals. The comments I've made about the wall of CapEx, and I'll keep making it, and I don't think I've ever worn my T-shirt to the inquiry, but I do have a T-shirt that talks about using more before we build more.
We'll have to recall you.
Recall me to wear the T-shirt. I'm wearing it to Energy Ministers' meeting tomorrow, Senator, so that could be get a bit of discussion. We're seeing quite significant uplifts in capital expenditure in the distribution businesses, largely driven through things like climate resilience, cyber security, the need to upgrade the grid for exports from solar, so augmentation to accommodate new sources of consumer energy resources, and demand growth. And so that will be a function of what happens with that demand growth. And so, you know, if you get lots of data centres, for example, you're going to get big increases in load. You may actually see falling network prices in that context as we electrify vehicles. Similarly, if we can make sure that effectively those vehicles are charging at times in the day when there's excess capacity, we're going to see falling network costs. And so the challenge, and the reason I keep talking about this wall of CapEx, is to keep reminding everyone, A, we have to be completely focused on cost discipline, and that's our job to make sure everybody is doing that. But secondly, we have to make sure that we've got a way of ensuring that these new sources of load and solar and batteries, etc., are being coordinated in such a way that they are not adding to the need to build out the grid, and that we're making a more efficient use of the grid. So I've talked a lot about the fact that we see average network utilisation in the distribution system at only 43%. So there's a huge opportunity there to make sure that where we are needing to spend more CapEx, it's only when necessary, and that we're also filling in the use of the grid at times of the day when there is spare capacity. So I think there could be falling network prices, but it is very much dependent on making sure that we have those policies to orchestrate these resources, and that we are not charging at times of the day when the network's already under stress.
Okay. I mean, the thing is, though, I thought when you go to the ISP, and my understanding is the AEMC report is sort of based on the ISP, I say that up front, when you go to the ISP, the actual demand from residential households is pretty stable over the forwards, over like the forward projections. So it doesn't seem like I'm just trying to work out how this works, because you're saying that the reason the network costs will stay stable is because of increased demand, but the ISP doesn't show increased demand from residential.
The ISP does, from memory, have it's almost
pretty stable. I'm looking at the chart on page 25 of the ISP. Doesn't change much. Might go up a little bit.
At 2050, there's a really significant increase in demand, and I'd be surprised if it didn't go up with the electrification of transport. So are you looking at 2030? I mean,
demand goes up. Demand goes up, but just as a separate section on residential, it doesn't change much. The bigger increase is business and industry.
Even with the electrification of transport?
Well, it says, I've got a chart here, figure 5, page 25, electricity consumption, NEM, step change, that's the scenario they use. And there's a light purple bar for residential, probably goes up a little bit, certainly not in the context of the other parts of the grid or the other consumption. It's very small.
I think we'd have to look at what's in
maybe you could take that on notice. I realise it's not your work. It's just there's not a lot of detail in the AMC's report. Okay, I just wanted to go back to last week in Sydney. So just to get just the wind figures. So did you say on the 26th of November wind was 280 and capacity 2760? That's what I wrote down.
Just come back to that page again. So, yes, on the 26th of November, so the coal units that were off were 2,690 megawatts, and the wind generation was 280 megawatts out of a possible 2,762.
What was the...
That's during those high prices, not the whole day, Senator.
Oh,
just
okay, so that's during the high price events.
Yeah.
And on the 27th?
On the 27th, I don't have the wind. Was there low wind on the 27th? That's not in the note.
And I'll check.
Can we come back to you on
Sure.
the 27th? I have the figures for the 2nd and the 3rd, though.
Of December?
Yeah.
All right, we'll give them to me.
So during the high prices on the 2nd of December, wind generation was 300 megawatts out of 2,762 and 439 megawatts out of 262 during the high prices on the 3rd of December.
Okay. All right. And have we got any further clarification on the coal situation?
Yes, Senator.
Okay.
I apologise, you're correct. Vales Point was unplanned.
Vales or Bayswater?
Vales Point, according to the...
Oh, okay.
So Vales Point, this is Vales Point 6, Unit 6 was unplanned.
Yeah, I apologise for
last
that. So
on the 26th and the 27th then as well.
Returned to service on the 3rd of December.
Okay. All right.
But then another Eraring unit went off this week.
Yes.
Yesterday, that's correct.
Can I ask you about that, or is that more one for AMO?
I mean, I don't know anything more other than that it went off on the
all right.
Wednesday. Yeah.
Because obviously that one is not associated with the high price events just yet. Okay. All right. Well, look, if you can come back if you can get those figures on wind before you go, that'd be great.
I'll just get Mr. Garbutt to
I've got some other questions if there's time, but I realise I've taken up quite a lot.
No problem. Just on that bit, sorry, the last question you were raising was around forget that. I'll have to check Hansard. I'll come back to you. Just some questions. You'll be familiar when you appeared on the first hearing day, late October, I believe it was. We were talking a bit about the RIT-T process, and by that I mean writ large, I guess the assessment and approval project for transmission projects as they move through the system. And there were a number of steps that had to go through. There was a need, and then that was put at one point into a PCSR, a project specification consultation report for those following at home. And then from there it went into the RIT-T process, the regulatory investment test for transmission. I missed a step in there, didn't I, that AER was responsible for?
So prior to the integrated system plan, the AER did have an additional role. So effectively what would happen before, because there wasn't, whilst there was the National Transmission Network Development Plan, essentially it was the jurisdiction, so a jurisdictional planner, so the transmission company of a particular jurisdiction would do their transmission annual planning report, and projects would be identified through that process. Now, occasionally, though, sometimes that would align with when a business was going through through their 5-year revenue determination. At other times, it would be listed as a contingent project in the revenue determination if it wasn't quite ready or hadn't met the triggers for that. And so, as part of those revenue determination processes, we would establish triggers for contingent projects. And so, we would say in the revenue determination, you can come back and seek funding for this once it's passed the RIT-T and subject to having received a 516(6) decision from the AER. And so what that meant was that the business would have to have conducted the RIT-T, the regulated investment test for transmission, identify the need. As you said, there was the project specifications consultation report, then there was the project assessment draft report, and then the project assessment conclusions report. And then they would come to us and say, effectively, can we get a determination under Clause 516(6) of the National Electricity Rules, which is we would then do an assessment that the preferred option that had come out of the RIT was in fact the option that maximises the net economic benefits of the project. And so that step had to be satisfied before we could undertake the contingent project assessment. So that was the old process. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's probably a fair summary.
So now the 516(6) is taken out. Is the PSCR still in the process?
No. So when the integrated system plan came to be, effectively the ISP optimal development pathway took the place of that first PSCR process, and so it identifies the need, and it has a range of candidate options through which then the transmission business would conduct the RIT-T as it used to, the second two steps, so the draft report and the conclusions report. And that's still the same sort of economic analysis that they do. They model the impacts on the electricity system, not the broader economy, but the economic flows within the electricity system. And then they would, and through the creation of the ISP, if these are actionable ISP projects, they automatically can move to a contingent project application assessment from us, provided they've satisfied four triggers. Or it's one trigger, four elements of one trigger. One is effectively that they have completed the RIT-T. Another one is that they have sought confirmation through the feedback loop that the cost of the project is still within the envelope that would be on the optimal development pathway, that the option still meets the identified need, and that there has been any disputes that are on foot have been resolved. So they're effectively what has to happen now for us to then do the contingent project assessment.
Thank you very kindly. That's really helpful. You just mentioned that they have to go back for feedback loop and make sure that the costs are still within the ODP. Would it be fair to say that the ODP has a fairly large balloon or space that it can assess these things in? Where is that figure determined, that it's still within that?
So when they do the feedback loop, when AEMO does the feedback loop assessment, we effectively get a number that says it can't be more than, I think is how it works, rather than, I'm not sure how big the entire window is, but effectively we're told, when you do your assessment, it can't exceed this amount. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's as I understand it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I assume this is a question for AEMO, but since you write the guidelines, you don't have any sense of what that within or under this sort of number should be, or the calculation for it?
No, our guidelines don't specify that. They do sort of say to AEMO that, per the rules, they need to set out the cost, and then when they complete the feedback loop, they need to look at what it may mean if, in terms of how they model this, if the cost differs from what was presented in the ISP itself. So if it's the same, I think it's much more straightforward. If it's different, our guideline gives them some guidance of things they should think about in how they remodel. Does it still sit within this optimal development path? But it doesn't prescribe a range for that.
Am I right in guessing then that because when they do the feedback loop and they're going back against all the other paths to make sure that it's still on the optimal development path, would I be right in guessing that all the other paths that they're assessing it against have probably also had the same cost increases applied to them?
I would think so. I'm not sure to answer that question. I think that might be one for AEMO. Yeah.
Terrific. Is it possible to get, and you might say they're available on your website, previous copies of the 516.6 assessment?
Yeah, probably the most recent one we did was with Project Energy Connect. So that project went through the old rules, and so at the time that we did the revenue or the contingent project application decision, I think we also published a 516.6 decision for that. But we can get a copy of that and provide that to the committee.
Thank you. Just a couple of last quick ones. PADR and PACR are fairly large pieces of work, aren't they? And they go to consultation and, as I'm told, drag on and on and on. That's not my commentary. It's what we're hearing. Who, at the end of the day, gives oversight and, in effect, marks that homework for the proponent?
So the rules require a project proponent to obviously follow the rules that are set out for a regulated investment test decision. Anyone can lodge a dispute on that with us, and if a dispute is lodged, then we would assess that dispute. And obviously, so in that context, using your language of marking homework, we would be looking at whether the dispute is valid. And so, for example, on HumeLink, we did have a dispute from Wanelli from memory, and we required changes to the PACR as a result of that dispute. So there is that element of it, but it's very much based on someone lodging a dispute with us. There's also a requirement under the rules for an individual project proponent to form a view as to whether or not there's been a material change in circumstances that's eventuated through the course of undertaking the RIT or between the RIT and when they lodge a contingent project application with us. And so, the rules on that have changed slightly recently, so there's sort of a stronger requirement on and more guidelines for project proponents around when a material change in circumstances might have occurred. But we certainly expect to see that they have met those requirements under the rules when we receive a contingent project application. And in fact, we've written to both TransGrid and Marinus Link around making sure that they have undertaken that analysis when it's come to us.
Great, thank you. But just clarifying, no one checks the homework through the PADR, PACR?
So if a dispute is raised, then I would say we are responsible for ensuring.
Only if a dispute is raised?
Yeah. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no person who's tasked with looking at every conclusions report and essentially signing off on it. Our jurisdiction's only enlivened when a dispute is filed.
For the two biggest parts of the investment test.
The only thing I also would say, though, Senator, is when we do make a contingent project decision, one of the elements of the trigger, as I mentioned before, is that there is a valid RIT-T. So we would at least have to turn our mind to the question of whether or not the RIT-T is valid, and we've done that. So when you think about that, it's sort of how why we engaged on this question of the material change in circumstances analysis in the context of HumeLink, because we were saying, well, hang on, the cost has changed so much. Where's the additional modelling? What is that going to tell us? So I think we do certainly have to turn our mind to the question of whether the RIT-T is valid to make a CPA decision.
But again, through that lens, material change.
Yeah.
But as just to review the final output and say, tick, tick, does that comply? No, that no one's tasked with doing that in each case.
Understand. I will leave it there because some of the material that Commissioner Breakey touched on go to that as well. So if I have any questions on notice, I'll send them through.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much for appearing. Sorry.
And do you want me to just check, Mr. Garbutt, do you have the WIN number for the Senator?
Yeah, I've got one period. It was 124 megawatts of wind online.
Sorry, I missed that. Was this for the 27th?
Was that during the high price event?
During the high
what was
price
the
event.
wind generation, sorry?
124.
124. And that was still 2760 capacity on that day?
Yeah, that doesn't change.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. Well, just on that, obviously on that day, which seemed to be the most high-stress day, wind was just running at a 4% capacity factor. I mentioned earlier the AEMC report, and they found in their report, they say on page 9, that we found the largest benefits were for connecting wind generation because it offers diversification benefits to compared to other generation types. I mean, I know this is not your report, but if wind is only turning up at a 4% capacity factor on a high-stress day, how can we conclude that it's actually the best for diversification?
I think that's a very similar question to how we calculate a capacity factor for coal plant, Senator. So normally we'd say coal plant has a capacity factor of 70 or 80%, depending on the running conditions, could be as high as 90%. But that doesn't take account of when it's offline for planned or unplanned outages. So the capacity factor is in fact, wind availability does count towards that capacity factor. So while it may have been low on that day, we see at other times through, the period it's very high. So in the last quarter, across the NEM, wind output was 21% higher than what it was in the previous Q3, isn't that correct?
Which was very low. But
21% higher than what it was.
Yeah, which is very low, the previous quarter. But, I mean, it's across the 4 days. It was 10% on 26th of November, 4% 27th of November, 11% 2nd December, 16% 3rd of December. Yep. It's not exactly something you'd want to put your house on. All right, just some other questions before you go. I wanted to return to the HumeLink issue, which we've taken some evidence of in between our hearings. When did the AER learn that the HumeLink project had increased in cost from $3.9 billion to $4.9 billion?
So we got asked this question on notice, and I'll ask whoever has that response in front of them, because we had to do a bit of digging around to make sure we knew. It was July 2023 from memory, but who has a copy of that question on notice?
Looking for that.
The most recent one? Do we have the most recent one? That looks like the older ones.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'd look through all the notices.
It was July.
I might have missed it, but I had a look at them all. I couldn't see it.
Senator,
there was a lot, so I might have missed it.
That may have been a question we were asked through Senate estimates, and I think it might still be with the department.
Okay, well, Well,
I can tell you it's July.
I haven't reviewed those ones, but yes, well, could I get an answer on that?
It's July 23. I just need the team to check what date in July.
July 23. Well, if you could, if you've prepared the answer, presumably you know it, or someone knows it, someone can find it pretty quickly.
We've got 17 July in this draft here.
17th July 23. And so was that information you received from our email on the 17th of July?
No, I think I'm just looking at the answer we've prepared here, which I just note, Senator, is still in draft form.
Okay.
But that Transgrid staff met with AER staff to provide an update on costs and timing. Okay. And at that meeting, Transgrid confirmed that it expected the total cost of HumeLink to be $4.9 billion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that was subsequently published by AEMO on the 28th of July in their Transmission Expansion Options Report. But then I have a report here, the Contingent Project Early Application Stage 1 Part 2 report from the AER, an AER determination published in August 2023. And throughout that report, HumeLink is described as a $3.9 billion project. So why, if you knew on the 17th of July that it was actually $4.9 billion, why did this report refer to it as a $3.9 billion project?
Can I just ask you to double check it's August? Because I think that decision was made in April 23.
Well, the title of the first page I've got here, I'll just read it out. The report is AER Determination, HumeLink Early Work Stage 1, brackets Part 2, close brackets, Contingent Project. And then on that first page says August 2023.
17 August 2020. No, that's 2022.
Doesn't have a date.
So which is it, Stage 1 Part 1 or Stage...
No, Stage 1 Part 2. And it says August 2023 on the title page. Doesn't have a date, just August 2023. And throughout that report, HumeLink is described as a $3.9 billion project.
Yeah, 25 August 2023, I think the decision was made on that.
So just to be clear, the decision made 25 August?
I'm just looking, I've got a timeline here for HumeLink, and it looks to me like we approved $227.9 million for the long lead equipment on the 25th of August 2023. Part of the challenge, when we get a proposal from a business, we can't insert our own views on it. We have to be told what. So when we got that advice in the 17th of July 2023. It was in a meeting. The proposal and the documents that had been put to us by the business for that application would have been for the original amount of the 3.9 million or whatever it was. Yeah, the 3.9 billion. And that's what we would have been responding to. But look, can we, if you've got further, I just don't have all the documents in front of me, we can go and have a look at that. But that would have been around the, as I said, we made that decision on the 20, is it dated there? I think it's the 23rd of August.
Okay, but you can see the issue I'm raising.
Your issue is, we found out.
You were advised by the proponent Transgrid on the 17th of July 2023 that actually the costs were 4.9 billion. There is on your website, I've just brought it up, a report dated the August 2023, obviously a month later, and the first line of this report is HumeLink is an estimated $3.9 billion transmission update, linking Greater Sydney local area with the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme.
Yeah, no, I understand the point you're making.
Seems,
what I'm just wanting to double check is, given we found out in a meeting as opposed to people formally advising us of a change in the cost of the project, we may or may not have been able to take account of that in that decision legally. So that's what I'm just not certain of, Senator. And we would have made that decision as a board prior to the date on the 25th of August as well.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just now going, I believe you also commissioned an independent expert assessment report on HumeLink. It was conducted by EMCA. Is that right? Does that ring a bell?
I don't know
how you pronounce that. MCA. Do they pronounce it MCA? Okay. Now, by MCA, that report found that there was no need for HumeLink before 2030. You, I think, then went and queried Transgrid, and in your subsequent report, you found that you questioned them about extra benefits that they had, consumer benefits. And I've got here, you say, in response to our query, Transgrid provided further reasoning on the treatment of these network assumptions on its MCCA. What were those extra benefits that Transgrid did? Did you accept them?
So they're two different things, I think, that you're talking about there. So if I take the last bit first, what we did is we required a material change of circumstances analysis to be done by Transgrid to justify how the project, whether the project still had sufficient net economic benefits to outweigh the increase in costs. They came back with modelling that, from memory, had been undertaken by a company called EY Rome Consulting. When we looked at that, we were concerned about whether that modelling was because there had been about 4 times the benefits of what was in. Now I'm going from my memory, so I'm asking my colleagues to jump in if I get anything wrong here. But there was basically a quadrupling of the benefits under their modelling. We commissioned our own modelling from ACL Allen to get them to retest that. In that, we found significantly lower benefits. We also increased the because effectively they'd applied some discounts to the preferred option based on the early works funding, which they hadn't applied to the other 2 options, and so we corrected for that as well. But even after we had corrected for the inflated benefits and the inconsistent treatment of costs, the option 3A was still the preferred option of the 3 that were tested there. So that's why we continued with the project. In terms of your earlier part of your question, which was not about the material change in circumstances, but I think was actually about the timeline for HumeLink, that was something the board did deliberate quite significantly on. We asked a lot of questions of our team and of our independent experts around the costs of Transgrid. One of the challenges with it was that the early works proceeded on a previous ISP, so they went through on the 2022 ISP, whereas the final amount went through on the 2024 ISP. The 2022 ISP had a delivery date, I think from memory, of 26, 27. You might need to just check, someone check that for me. And so a lot of the stuff, the contracts that entered into, et cetera, were all around that earlier delivery date. The 2024 ISP has an actionable window of between 2026 and 2030, but to have delayed the project would have actually cost consumers more because of the locked-in contracts at that point. So that's a crude description of what happened, but I'll just see whether any of my colleagues wish to add to that. Steph?
No, I think that's correct. And looking at the 2022 ISP, I think the delivery date was targeting 2026.
2026, yeah.
Is that still the case?
No. Now the ISP has an actionable window, which is, I think, between 2026 and 2030. But that actionable window didn't exist at the time at which the early works projects went through. So they've gone and entered into a whole bunch of contracts which have incentives. You know, you understand these types of contracts, Senator, for completion within the 26-27 financial year, and to delay the project would have cost consumers.
I mean, does this raise some questions then about the approval of early works? I mean, it seems like we've got ourselves in a situation where we've sunk a lot of costs and then get locked into a particular pathway. In terms of this report about planning our energy system, are there lessons to be learned from this experience?
So, I mean, early works, from our perspective, the original, I mean, it's now a feature of the rules, but originally we allowed early works because we wanted to allow for efficient abandonment in the event that it didn't make sense to do a project. So if you can imagine, Senator, I mean, sunk costs, you should walk away from a sunk cost if it doesn't provide additional marginal benefit. So what we were hoping is that as the projects were able to find out more about their cost and the likely timing and the need, et cetera, that you would then be able to walk away if the project wasn't going to deliver benefit to consumers. But what we found in the ISP is that HumeLink is still required. The timing of it is a wider window, but it's still required. And so the cost of delivering that project on a delayed timeframe would have been higher to consumers than delivering it on the timeframe that was agreed.
How long is the actionable window again?
The actionable window is from 2026-7 to 2031-32.
Okay. And just finally, just going back to the evidence earlier about the 17th of July, did they provide that updated cost estimate in a meeting? Was it
That's
in
what
writing?
our draft question. I wasn't in the meeting,
okay,
obviously,
right.
Senator. So we're relying upon the advice that's in a draft question on notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you've got in the draft answer. You've got it's in a meeting.
In a meeting, yeah.
Was there anything written from Transgrid to the AER at around that time?
That's
all we
maybe
have
if you
in
could
that.
take on notice if Transgrid wrote to you before the.
I don't think we have. We'll have to take it on notice.
Take it on notice. Take it on notice. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. One very last quick one, because I'm not sure if it's a question for AER or AEMC. In research and evidence we've seen, it's come to note that there are some projects, transmission projects being built in Queensland that are being done on a market basis as opposed to applying for to be put towards their RAB. Just very briefly, or on notice, does AER govern that, or does AEMC, or is there not as much governance?
So this is the Queensland Renewable Energy Zone projects being completed by Powerlink, I assume?
Correct.
We govern what's regulated, obviously, in the Powerlink asset base, but they are doing this outside of the regulated asset base, and therefore we don't have a role in approving that. But that said, they still have to comply with ring fencing obligations, et cetera, that would apply to them if that was relevant. But did you want to add anything, Ms. Joly, to that?
No, I think that's a good summary. We have a little bit of a different planning role in that respect as well under their legislation.
If you think relevant, share it with me on notice, but that did answer my question. So, I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you so much for appearing. Very much appreciated. Grab my script. The committee will report to the Senate on Friday 20 December and request that answers to questions be taken on notice provided to the committee secretariat by close of business Thursday 12 December 2024. The committee will now suspend for a short break.